Okay, good evening. Welcome to part two of the reading of Bishop's poem using form based on her poem One Art. So when we were leaving off the last time, so if you haven't already started with part one, please do so. I think it'll clear a few things up. So remember, we're working with a villanelle. We are dealing with form, which means that this has certain rules that it follows, such as its stanza structure, five three-line tercets, right? Three-line stanzas called tercets, followed by one quatrain, right? And then it has the repetition in line 1 and line 3, showing up again, respectively, in these lines, and then the rhyme scheme as well. So a lot happening inside of one poem, and we read it once and talked about some of the things that stood out for us in that, or stood out for me in that first one. So that's where we should be. So I want to talk a little bit about rhyme with you real quick. So rhyming is not what I want to say. People rhyme regardless if they're trying to write poems, if that makes sense. Children rhyme. It's a pleasing thing. It's fun to listen to. It's a fun way that we learn language, right? When we hear the sounds working together. So it's a pretty fascinating reality that two sounds close to one another can be interesting, and it's because theoretically and arguably it's because the sounds make the words we feel as if they belong together. There's a rightness to it. I think this is a lot of the power of hip hop is that we can listen to rap and hear how a certain MC can combine sounds and sentence structure across a beat that then calls to attention all of these various different sonic experiences that we can begin to hear that sort of, I don't know, kind of open up language in a new way. So rhyme is, again, really inherently pleasing. When and if, I should say, often when it actually really, they belong together. So true rhymes, or what we typically call them full rhymes. And a full rhyme is when two words sound like they rhyme, okay, for lack of a better, it's like true and blue, right? Those words sound like they rhyme because the oo sound, the vowel sound is very much the same. So those sound very much like they do. Or dead and lead, fed. You understand this, right? You almost intuitively understand it. But they belong together. We say they're full rhyme, and that's what it suggests. It suggests that a kind of unity, right? They are logically connected because they're sonically connected, and sometimes that's true and sometimes it's not. But we feel comfortable with that connection. That's a full rhyme. Now, a half rhyme. So these are full rhymes, right? By the way, master, disaster. They sound like they rhyme. They make sense. Intent and spent. Yeah, absolutely. These words sound like they belong together. There's something in that we can work with. But then there's another kind of rhyme that we call like a half rhyme or a slant rhyme, right? There's other words for this. There's also what we might call a para rhyme or an I rhyme. So two words that look like they should rhyme, but they don't whenever you say them side by side, like comb and tomb, right? They don't belong together, though they should by all accounts. But then you have something more like this. So disaster and fluster don't actually rhyme. They don't rhyme, but also they're very close to not rhyming. If you look at master and fluster especially, they are close to one another, but they are slightly off. And that's what a half rhyme tells us. When I told you earlier that form equals content, what I mean by that to some degree is that a full rhyme says these two things belong together, and a half rhyme says, or a slant rhyme says, there's something separating these two, although they have a lot in common with one another. So it's actually like a kind of variation. It's listening to somebody who just doesn't quite hit the pitch right, and it calls to attention the actual pitch. And that's all musical references. If that's not helpful though. We don't all deal with music, but the idea is that it doesn't quite match. It's not flush. It's not right next to one another, but it's close. But we actually hear the difference in a much stronger way. So that's something that we're going to use whenever we close read a poem that uses rhyme. We're going to see what are the rhymes doing, what are they trying to say. So that's a very, very brief introduction to rhyme. If you'd like some follow-up on that, let me know, and I'll be happy to do that for you. So what I want to do now is go through a brief summary, because we need to be able to do that whenever we're going to write a paper about something. And basically what we have in the poem is we have a speaker here who is starting off with basically a thesis statement, an argument, saying the art of losing isn't hard to master. So and everything from there is a further explanation, elucidation of this general idea, which is, again, the art of losing isn't hard to master. So she is talking about losing stuff, right? Losing, this concept of losing, as a type of art form, right? A thing that requires practice, a thing that is typically seen as aesthetically beautiful, or again, to be pleasing. But she's combining it with loss, which is, of course, one of the great suffering emotions of humanity is feel our loss. But she's saying that this is something that you can absolutely master. So it goes from different types of things that you can lose. So she starts with, something like lost door keys or spending an hour badly. And then it moves a little bit more into these types of places and names and these sort of generalized nouns, convincing herself along the way that these aren't the worst things. They won't bring disaster. And then it gets more specific into her mother's watch, and then houses, and then cities, realms, rivers, continents. So it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then it settles on a you, a second person that the poem hasn't introduced up until this moment in the poem, and a couple of specific examples of this, their voice, the gesture that the speaker loved, and then a repetition here at the end where we have this interesting parenthetical, but she comes to the conclusion, which is her same thing as her thesis, which is that basically the evidence shows us that you can become very good, you can master losing, right? You can master it. And it may look like disaster, right? But she's been trying to convince herself along the way, their loss is no disaster, that there isn't a disaster built into this experience. So it's in some ways maybe like a coping mechanism of a poem, a way to handle loss, as that's not typically one of our strongest suits as a species. So I think that makes sense. If you're not getting that same read from the poem, that's okay. It's a complicated poem. But I think a lot of the language makes a lot of sense. And we can look up words we don't know if there's anything in there. So I think if I'm just going to start to go through this thinking about form, one of the things I want to think about is what am I being convinced of with this refrain, this repetition, and what's my rhyme doing? So I'm just going to start at the top and kind of work my way through a couple of stanzas and talk you through these things. So like I said earlier, the art of losing isn't hard to master. So that's really iambic pentameter, which I'm not going to go into right now. Maybe in one of our later videos I will, but it's a very regular rhythm. The art of losing isn't hard to master. So very much not choppy, but it has a good beat to it. Then we have the next line. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost that their loss is no disaster. So it's a semicolon here. And then it tells me that there are basically that stuff itself, these things, this sort of very generalized thing here, are filled with the intent, as if it is their responsibility, right? They have intent that they want to be lost. Okay, so something that's just an important distinction between somebody, but something, they just have the intent. It's indicative to them. It's true. They're nothing you could do. They were going to go. And when that happens, when that thing is gone and it is lost, then the speaker says that there is no real disaster because they're so filled with the intent, there can't be disaster. So if I just look at the rhyme words, master, disaster, well, this kind of makes sense because it seems like she's trying to tell me, like, first of all, there isn't a disaster, but she's still using that word, but there is no disaster in this, but you're going to learn how to master these so-called disasters if you just pay attention to how to become a better practitioner, an artist, oh, I said it that way, an artist of loss. The more you do this, right, the more you practice this, then the more you become this, so that when you arrive here, it doesn't feel that bad. That seems to be the structure, and the poem's rhyme seems to go ahead and bring that out a little bit. Oh, goodness. Sorry, that was a small bug. I'm glad I'm not starting over. So, cool. We got that so far. We're into this first stanza. We're kind of seeing how rhyme and meter sorry, freaked out by that bug. So we kind of see how rhyme works inside of this one poem. And then we can move on to the next stanza. I have my stanza break here, right? So this moment here suggests that she's kind of finished this idea. We're comfortable here. New stanza starts. In fact, I look down, I see that every single stanza ends with a period. So there's a real sense of, like, in terms of nuance, that she's very much ending ideas and going on, or suggesting that she's trying to end ideas, which makes sense because the the whole poem is about trying to think of an ending to this problem of loss. So she starts again here. I'm going to go ahead and go through this one, then I'll stop the video after that one. This will be a little bit longer than 10 minutes. My apologies. So if you made it this far through the video, if you email me the word Tropicana, I'll put 25 points on one of your response papers, extra bonus points. So lose something every day, she says. So again, it's a direct order, right? She's telling me like, I'm gonna do this art here. I'm gonna practice this so that I become a master and it doesn't hurt me as much. Then if I'm gonna do that, I have to lose something every day. Okay. Accept the fluster of lost door keys, the hour badly spent. So I'm gonna come back to this rhyme here, how it's a little bit off, a little bit slanted, and talked about what she's trying to convince me of. She's saying that to get better at this, right, this art of losing, I have to lose something every day, which makes sense. If I'm gonna have to practice, I'm gonna get better at it, I have to do that. And then she's telling me that after that, the speaker says, I have to accept the fluster, that feeling of being flustered, which, you know, you probably have your own definition for this one, or what that word suggests to you. To me, it's just kind of like you're off a little bit. You don't feel like you're really all the way present. You have a nagging experience, but it's not so bad that you can't, you know, finish your task. So I got flustered by that thing, this obviously terrible animal-sized bug, and it kind of just threw me off. I could still talk, but I was just a little off, right? So that's what fluster means to me. And she's saying like, you lose your door keys, sure, or you waste an hour of your time. And these are flustering experiences because we've all lost something like this, some sort of key component to our life. But it's more like, whatever, you're not that big of a deal, you can replace it. And we all waste these, you know, constantly. It's just what we do, right? So, but it's flustering, it's not really terrible, it's a little bit frustrating though. We just have to get used to it. And then we end here back with the opening line, the art of losing isn't hard to master. So we return to our place of normalcy, right? She's reminding herself, hey, the art of losing isn't hard to master. Come back to this, this is our touchstone. This is how we find our peace and our calm. And so what I want to point out here that's really interesting to me is that when the experience of being flustered, right, and the lost door keys and the hour badly spent, this experience here is a flustering experience. And that actually changes the rhyme sound. Like it can't be a full rhyme here, or it could be, of course, but a full rhyme here would suggest that everything's okay in a different way. This shows me that there isn't actually a direct connection between these two moments. There's actually a bit of a fluster, right? It's like a flustered rhyme. They kind of work together, but they don't. So it's as if as she is experiencing loss here, right, and remembering these moments, she's experiencing the experience of fluster, and it's coming out in the rhyme, right? When she has her stuff together, she's like, I got this, I can do the rhyme, no big deal. I'm a little off, I'm coming back to it, I've got it. That's my dramatic reenaction of the last bit of the second stanza. So I'll end the video there, and then we'll do at least one more. And then again, if you have any questions or you want some follow-up on anything, let me know, and I will be more than happy to respond to that. Thank you very much. Hope you have a lovely evening.